Well, for Egyptians ahead of tomorrow's mass demonstration, the air is charged with anticipation and to some degree fear. What happens in the next day will, of course, be crucial for protesters, citizens, and the country's embattled president. Mona Eltahawy is a widely published Egyptian-born columnist, commentator on Middle East affairs. She joins me now from New York. Mona, there's so much being put on anticipation on tomorrow. What is going to be the tipping point to actually get Mubarak out of office? It hasn't worked until now, despite the fact there have been protests around the country. Why would tomorrow make a difference?
Well, I'm much more optimistic than all of you. I don't see this as a crisis in Egypt. I see this as an uprising in Egypt, and every day we're getting closer to a revolution. And the reason that I say this is that every day Hosni Mubarak seems more desperate than the day before. He seems to operate in an alternate reality or a parallel universe, because while the crowds are getting bigger and bigger on the streets calling for him to step down, he's acting as if it's business as usual. And the turning point for many Egyptians that I know who have been protesting for days in Egypt, and for those of us watching from abroad, was the armed forces position. And we heard today the armed forces said they would not fire on people. And this has relieved a lot of people. Tomorrow is the big day in the sense of really even larger numbers coming out. And I got a phone call just before I came on air and before they cut cell phone lines from an activist I know in Tahrir Square, who told me that tomorrow at 9 in the morning Cairo time, they plan to start marching throughout Cairo to the presidential palace. It's not clear that Mubarak is there, but there will be marches across the country that will involve all walks of society. There are at least 25 factories where workers have said they will march. And we've seen people, academics, children, grandparents, and that all energizes me. It doesn't worry me. It convinces me that this is a mass uprising against Mubarak's dictatorship. And I'm convinced that we're days away from seeing Mubarak step down.
Well, you mentioned the fact that the military came out today. Obviously, I mean, that's a huge factor in this, and they were saying that they wouldn't fire on peaceful protesters. But does that mean that they no longer support Mubarak?
It's a good question, because the armed forces in Egypt have normally been quite secretive, and no one really knows what they feel. They're obviously a huge force in the country, but there's a huge difference between the way Egyptians react towards the armed forces and the way Egyptians feel towards the security forces, which the Mubarak regime used to brutally crack down against this uprising during the first few days. But what it says to me as an Egyptian, when I see tanks in the middle of Tahrir Square and in other parts of Cairo, and I see people around the tanks and they're singing national songs, I've even heard of young people standing on tanks, posing, taking pictures. I see an armed forces that wants to take the side of the future in Egypt, and that side they know is this mass uprising that is saying it's time for our freedom and we don't want a dictator anymore.
Well, when you see this, and as you're mentioning what you're expecting tomorrow about the people, peaceful protests, people marching to the palace, in the end, what is Hosni Mubarak holding on to now? Is it just a point of pride for him to stay there?
What he's holding on to is what dictators all over the world hold on to, and that is power, which surely he knows has faded by now, because, he's been in this position for 30 years. He's been in this position supported by Western allies who all know that he's a dictator, and he thinks he can still call on that support. What you're seeing happening in Egypt now is a historical moment. It's a turning point of a people of a country saying no more to a dictator. It's infecting the entire region. Hosni Mubarak is our Berlin Wall, and when he falls, and he will fall, it will open up the rest of the region in the way that the Eastern Bloc was opened up when the Berlin Wall fell down. So he's stubbornly holding on. A friend of mine called it the other day suicidal stubbornness, because what you're talking about is the future, the stake of a country, and one man who doesn't want to let go.
We'll continue to watch it with you, Mona. Great to get your insights tonight. Thank you so much.